Have you ever thought about how a map could, well, lie? Or how a word you use every day meant something completely different centuries ago? Today, we're diving into 1,000 years of history on the Indian subcontinent, and we're not just looking at what happened. We're going to be detectives, uncovering how the clues from the past can be super surprising, even contradictory, and how they... Okay, so let's jump right in. Look at these two maps. They're of the exact same place, but they were made almost 600 years apart. The first one, from 1154, probably looks totally alien to you, right? South India's flipped to the top, and all the names are in Arabic. Now look at the second one from the 1720s. It feels much more familiar. You can see the coastlines are way more detailed, which, makes sense, because European merchants and sailors were the ones using it. The difference is just wow. And it really makes you wonder, how on earth can two maps of the same exact region look this different? And that right there gets to the heart of what being a historian is all about. The answer isn't just that the science got better. It's about context. To get what's going on, you have to try and see the world through the eyes of the people who made these things, understand their priorities, their worldviews, their knowledge. Okay, so let's move on to our next set of clues, and this is a big one. The words themselves. Language isn't set in stone. The meanings of words change all the time, and if you don't know that, it can totally change how you read something from the past. Let's take the word Hindustan. Today, a lot of people use it as another name for the modern country of India. But if you hop in a time machine and go back, you'd find its meaning was all over the place, depending on when you were. And we can actually see this evolution. Check this out. Back in the 13th century, a writer named Minhaj-e-Siraj used Hindustan to mean a very specific political area, basically the lands controlled by the Delhi Sultan. It didn't include South India at all. But then, fast forward 300 years, and you have the ruler Babur using it to describe the geography and culture of the whole subcontinent. The idea of it being a single nation-state, that's a much, much more recent idea. Here's another word that might surprise you. Foreigner. To us, it's simple, right? Someone from another country. But back in the medieval period, it meant something way more local and personal. So get this, a city dweller might have called a forest dweller a foreigner, just because they weren't part of their immediate society. They were an outsider. But two peasants living in the same village, they wouldn't have called each other foreigners, even if they had totally different religions or social backgrounds. It was all about community, not nationality. Okay, so we've seen how maps and words can be kind of tricky, but that brings up a really big question. Where are we even getting all this information from in the first place? How do we know any of this stuff? Well, for this period, historians are basically detectives, and their main clues are textual records. We're talking about chronicles written about rulers, letters, teachings from saints, court records, all handwritten on paper. And actually, the story of paper itself is pretty fascinating. Think about it like this. In the middle of the 13th century, paper was so rare and expensive that a scholar might literally wash the ink off an old document just to reuse the page. But just 1 century later, paper had become so cheap and easy to find that a shopkeeper might use it to wrap up your food. That boom in available records was a total game changer for historians. But this is where things get really tricky. There was no printing press. Not yet. So every single copy of a book or a document had to be made by a scribe, writing it all out by hand. And, we're all human. We make mistakes. So picture a scribe. He's copying a text, and the original sentence is pretty clear. But what if his mind wanders for just a second? His handwriting slips. A tiny change first becomes last, and that little mistake gets copied and recopied and recopied for centuries. All of a sudden, the entire historical meaning is flipped on its head. Historians today have to sift through all these different versions just to guess what the author actually wrote. And this isn't just a hypothetical problem. This actually happened. A famous 14th century writer, Ziauddin Barani, wrote his big chronicle in 1356 and then wrote a different version 2 years later. For hundreds of years, historians only knew about that second version. The first one? It was just lost in a giant library and wasn't discovered until the 1960s. It just goes to show you how one new discovery can change everything. So with all of that in mind, the tricky maps, the shifting words, the fragile texts, what kind of story do these sources actually tell us? What was this 1,000-year period from 700 to 1750 really like?
Well, first off, it was a time of massive innovation. New technologies showed up that completely changed daily life. You had the Persian wheel, which made it way easier for farmers to get water to their crops. You had the spinning wheel, which sped up weaving like crazy. And, of course, firearms, which, well, they changed warfare forever. And it wasn't just technology that was new. People's tastes were changing too. As travelers and merchants moved around, they brought new things with them. It's kind of wild to think that foods we see as total staples today, potatoes, corn, chilies, even tea and coffee, all of them were introduced to the subcontinent during this time. And all this change in technology, in farming, in trade, it created new opportunities. As forests were cleared for more farmland, new groups of people saw a chance to make a name for themselves. Groups like the warrior Rajputs, the Marathas, the Sikhs, and the Jats, they used this period of mobility to become really politically important, changing the social map for good. And of course, you can't talk about this period without talking about religion. It was a time of huge religious developments. Within Hinduism, you saw the worship of new deities and the rise of this powerful ideal called bhakti, a kind of personal, devotional love for a god. This was also when Islam arrived, first with merchants and migrants, and it became a major part of the subcontinent's religious life with its own diverse traditions. So that brings us to maybe the most important question of all. How do we take this incredibly messy, complicated, thousand-year story and make sense of it? Because the way we choose to frame the past, that completely changes how we understand it. For a long time, back in the 19th century, British historians split Indian history into three tidy boxes: Hindu, Muslim, and British. It was all based on the religion of the rulers. But today, pretty much no historian uses that system. Why? Because it just simplifies things way too much. It ignores the fact that tons of different faiths and people were living side by side, and it kind of suggests that the only thing that mattered was the ruler's religion. And this really is the key takeaway here. History isn't just a fixed list of dates and events you memorize for a test. It's an active, ongoing argument about what the evidence means. The story changes depending on what you focus on. Do you focus on the ruler's religions or on economic changes? Each choice gives you a totally different version of the past from the exact same set of clues. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. What about us? Look at the records we're creating right now. Our social media, our news, our emails. What clues are we leaving behind? And based on that evidence, what story will historians of the future tell about our time?